podcasting app. That way you'll never miss an episode. I'm Lindsay Duncombe. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to CBC Radio 1. CBC, always here for Canada.
Have you visited CBC's Being Black in Canada website? It's an online platform to explore the stories and experiences of Black Canadians across the country. A space for news, documentaries, arts and culture, Black achievement in sports, and so much more. Celebrating a uniquely Canadian perspective on Black issues with the cultural moments that matter to Black Canadians. Visit cbc.ca/Being Black in Canada.
You know the feeling of finding a really good podcast? Or the feeling of someone always being there, like your favorite radio show? Stream CBC Podcasts, CBC Music, and CBC Radio anytime, anywhere.
This is CBC News. At 12 o'clock, we're at minus 23 with an extreme cold warning and sunny skies in downtown Winnipeg. Good afternoon. I'm Matt Humphrey. The Premier wants to position Manitoba as an energy powerhouse. Wab Kinew is with all of Canada's premiers in Washington, D.C. on a joint lobbying effort aimed at convincing the Trump administration to back away from its ongoing tariff threats. He spoke with reporters in the past hour.
We're the Costco of critical minerals. And in order to keep the American economy moving forward, you need access to those raw materials. We are an energy superpower that's right next door to the United States of America, whether that's the hydroelectricity that my province exports, whether that's oil and gas from some of my western neighbors.
Kinew says their long-term commitment is ensuring the Canadian-American relationship prospers for decades to come. In fact, Manitoba and Canada as a whole have some of the largest known reserves of rare earth minerals. They include lithium, copper, nickel, silica, cesium, and tantalum. Those are critical in everything from batteries to electronics to solar panels. Mustafa Fayek is a professor emeritus in the University of Manitoba's Department of Earth Sciences.
Along the eastern part of the province, you get a lot of lithium and cesium and tantalum deposits. And around Thompson, Snow Lake, Flin Flon, and Lynn Lake, you get a lot of the copper and nickel deposits. So that's just simply based on the geology.
Fayek says Canada and Manitoba are popular suppliers of rare earth minerals because we are considered a stable environment. Manitoba's education minister hopes school divisions will consider keeping travel local instead of traveling south of the border. At a news conference, Tracy Schmidt was asked if she's advising schools to cancel travel plans to the United States. Schmidt says she knows field trips and outings are important for child development.
I would really encourage all school divisions and Manitobans across the province to consider how they might support our local economy and how they can spend their dollars and plan their travel right here in Manitoba.
Schmidt says in the current climate, it's important to support local businesses and industries. A new report finds loopholes in the rent control system in Manitoba are allowing unreasonable rent increases for tenants. Amanda Ems is co-author of the Manitoba Research Alliance report. Ems found tenants in West Broadway faced massive rent increases because the Residential Tenancies Act emboldens landlords who apply for increases above the guidelines. She interviewed 14 tenants.
And though they all had very different perspectives and came from different places, I found that a lot of their stories collided. They all talked about this imbalance of power over the renovations that were happening to their homes and the rent hikes that followed.
One of the tenants Ems interviewed saw their rent increase 18% in 1 year. The Right to Housing Coalition launched a Valentine's Day card campaign calling on the province to pass legislation that is fair for renters. The leaders of the United States and Russia spoke by phone today. On social media, Donald Trump says, among other things, he and Vladimir Putin agreed to start negotiations on ending the Ukraine war. But America's new defense secretary had a blunt message about what the U.S. sees for Ukraine's future. Crystal Gamansing explains.
Returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective.
Peter Hegseth sat just 2 chairs away from his Ukrainian defense counterpart, but a chasm separated their visions for the future.
The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement.
That's a big shift in position from what Joe Biden's Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said in 2023 when asked about Ukraine's NATO future.
I have no doubt that that will happen.
Ending the war is the goal of President Donald Trump, according to Hegseth.
We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine.
Hegseth said Trump will bring the two sides to the negotiating table, but any security guarantees would need to be backed up by Europeans, not American troops. Crystal Gamansing, CBC News, London.
Southwest Winnipeg is getting a new kindergarten to grade 8 school. The province announced the new school for 600 children in Prairie Point in Waverly West. It will be in the Pembina Trails School Division, which has seen an enrollment growth of 17% in 5 years. Superintendent Shelley Amos says families will be relieved their children can stay in their community for school.
Currently, we have students, hundreds of students, who I would say we are farming out to other schools in Pembina Trails. Some of them down the Pembina Strip and, of course, over at White Ridge as well. So this will really allow us to bring hundreds of students home to their community in Prairie Point and Waverly West.
The school is expected to open in September of 2027. And quickly, the Four Nations Face-Off tournament gets underway tonight in Montreal. The opening game has Team Canada taking on Team Sweden. The tournament is replacing the annual NHL All-Star Extravaganza. And tomorrow, Finland takes on the United States. Extreme cold warnings remain in place for much of the province. In Winnipeg, mainly sunny with wind, a high of -20. Bitter wind chill tonight. In Brandon, a high of -23 and mainly sunny. Dauphin, mainly sunny, a high of -22. In Flin Flon, a chance of flurries, a high of -21. Thompson, a high of -22 with flurries. And in Churchill, a chance of flurries, a high around -28 degrees.
Good afternoon, Manitoba. You're listening to Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1. It's Wednesday, February 12th. It's cold out there. My name is Chloe Friesen. Thank you for spending your afternoon with us. Coming up on today's show, the CEO at the International Peace Garden at Manitoba's border with the U.S. has been receiving some strongly worded emails since tensions between the two countries have heated up. We'll bring you more on that story. Were you the favorite child growing up? You can be honest, or was it one of your siblings? A new study says parents really do have a favorite child. In our call-in conversation, we wanted you to tell us if you agree. But first, it's cold outside, very cold, with no break in sight. But there is a silver lining. That's first up here on Radio Noon. Well, it is cold outside, like extreme cold warning for most of the province, cold outside. With the wind chill, it's -36 in Thompson, -40 in Brandon, and -47 in Churchill. And there's no reprieve from this in the near future, so it might feel like this is unusually cold. It's a cruel deep freeze, at least that's how I'm feeling it. But it turns out that's not quite the case. Scott Kaler is president and chief scientist with Weather Logics and joins us now. Hi, Scott.
Hi, good afternoon.
So I mentioned the phrase "a cruel deep freeze," and it kind of feels like we're stuck. This cold kind of feels endless. Are we stuck? Is that a safe assumption to make?
Well, we're stuck for the next little while at least. This really cold weather pattern is going to stick around for the rest of this week and into next week. But if I peer out into long-range forecasts, I do see signs of us warming up toward the end of February. So this winter, while it seems like it's dragging on, the good news is it won't last forever.
How unusual is this type of cold snap in terms of length?
It's really not that unusual. I mean, certainly the temperatures on any given day during this cold snap will be colder than normal, but just in the context of a Winnipeg winter, these types of cold periods are actually quite typical. In fact, a lot of people think this winter has been really cold, but in fact, we haven't had a colder than normal month yet. Both December and January were warmer than normal, technically. This February probably will end up colder than normal, but really the shock is just because of how much colder this winter is compared to last winter. Last winter was the warmest in living memory for anybody alive today. The only warmer winter was back in the 1800s. So we've just seen a big switch from one of the warmest winters ever to a typical winter, which seems like a big change.
So that warmer winter threw us off a little bit then.
Yeah, it did throw us off. And, if you look at the stats from last winter, we'll have had more cold weather this week than we had all of last winter.
Okay. So I mentioned there's a silver lining in this deep freeze. Can you please share that with us? I'm sure our listeners are very much looking forward to some sort of silver lining.
Well, I guess it depends who you ask. The silver lining for a lot of folks is that we're getting a lot of sunshine with this weather. That's some good news. The other thing is that when you have this really cold weather, you don't tend to get a lot of snow events because what we're in right now is an Arctic air mass, which contains very little moisture. And so that means that the possibility of any big storms is quite limited. We're going to see maybe, a day or two here or there that maybe has some light flurries. But by and large, it's going to be a pretty dry weather pattern with a lot of sunshine.
I'll take less shoveling over warmer temperatures. I think it's a pretty good deal. Now, Scott, lastly, what can farmers expect this spring based on what we've experienced so far? You mentioned that a cold snap like this can often mean less snow. Could that impact moisture?
Yeah, it will impact moisture through the month of February. So up till this point in the winter, our snowfall in most of southern Manitoba has been pretty close to normal. The Red River Valley has had pretty close to normal overall snow. Out west in western Manitoba, it's been a little bit snowier. But the thing is, when it comes to the spring thaw, the amount of snow that's on the ground really has a big impact for two reasons. Of course, there's the obvious one that the more snow you have, the longer it takes to melt. But also when you have a lot of snow on the ground, what that does is it reflects all of the sunlight. So by the time we get into March, the sun is actually quite strong. And there have been years where Manitoba has had temperatures into the 20s in mid-March. But if you've got snow on the ground, that's just not going to happen because all the sunlight is reflected back out into space and it can't warm up the temperatures near the ground. So if we do see a lot more snow in March, that's going to delay the start of spring. But on the other hand, if we do see a quick switch to warmer weather at the early part of March, we actually might see the snow disappear rather quickly.
All right. Well, Scott, I appreciate you joining us on the show today and giving us that little silver lining in the midst of this deep freeze.
You're very welcome. Have a great rest of your week.
You too. That was Scott Kaler, President and Chief Scientist with WeatherLogics.
Manitoba's the kind of place that draws you in. Every day it's growing, it's changing. Just when you think you've got it figured out, though, there's something new to understand. I'm Marcy Marcusa, host of the CBC Daily Podcast. This is Manitoba. I've covered the news from the rail line in Churchill to the border in Emerson, and it's talking about the local stories that help us understand this place. That's what This is Manitoba is all about. Find it on CBC Listen or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
It is 12:12. You're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg, 97.9 FM in Brandon, and everywhere on the CBC Listen app. And hello to the folks who are watching on the YouTube live stream. I'm Chloe Friesen. Thank you so much for joining us. Still to come on the show, were you the favorite growing up? You can be honest. Were you the favorite child, or was it one of your siblings? There's a new study that says parents really do have a favorite child. In our calling conversation, we want you to tell us if you agree and whether or not you were the favorite in your family. You can be honest. We'll have that conversation coming up just after 12:35. Also still to come, the CEO at the International Peace Garden at Manitoba's border with the U.S. has been receiving some strongly worded emails since tensions between the two countries have heated up. We're going to hear how this place for peace is navigating these tense times. That is still to come on the show. As well, as we've been hearing in the news, the province announced last hour a new dual-track K-8 school in Winnipeg's fastest-growing Waverley community. Details are coming up here on Radio Noon. A quick look at our weather forecast. Well, we just heard about that deep freeze lasting likely until the end of February. Right now in Winnipeg, minus 22 degrees, feeling like minus 27 with the wind chill. In Brandon, extreme cold warning in effect, feels like minus 38. Make sure you are bundling up if you are out and about in Brandon. In Thompson, minus 35. And in Churchill, minus 45 with the wind chill. You're listening to Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1. I'm Chloe Friesen. As tensions rise between U.S. and Canada, strongly worded emails have been landing in Tim Chapman's inbox. He's the CEO of the International Peace Garden. It's a nonprofit organization that maintains a massive garden that straddles the border of southwestern Manitoba and North Dakota. Some of those emails say they plan not to visit the garden this year out of protest. And it's prompted the CEO to send a letter out to the members and supporters, reminding them of the Peace Garden's purpose. And Tim, CEO of the Peace Gardens, joins us now. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me, Chloe.
So I have to ask, first and foremost, what was in some of those emails that you were sent?
Yeah, so last week, kind of on the heels of some of the tariff discussions that were going back and forth, some members and visitors from the Canadian side reached out, just expressing their dismay with the politics that are going on right now, and saying that maybe they wouldn't visit this year. So although there wasn't a huge volume of emails, there were 4, but after that 4th one, it seemed clear to me that we should put something out reminding folks that the garden stands for the peaceful coexistence and strong friendship of not just the countries in a government sense, but the citizens of our countries who have long gathered at the Peace Garden to celebrate that existence. And I got back to each individual who reached out, and through some back and forth, folks kind of got a little more in depth and said, we're just really disappointed with what's going on right now. And one individual said, the garden was one place that made sense to vent to. But then also, once we talked a little bit more, they said, might be a good idea to just keep coming and showing that example of peaceful relationship among citizens.
What was going through your mind when you saw those emails rolling into your inbox and having that realization that people did see the Peace Garden as a place to perhaps vent to, as you mentioned?
Honestly, I thought it was a good thing. Anytime the garden can serve as a place for people to express that dialogue, that's great. We're a apolitical organization, being a nonprofit, but obviously it's a great place for people to come together and have difficult discussions or not. Sometimes people just like to get away. It's a peaceful place, like a lot of gardens, where you can enjoy the natural beauty in all 4 seasons. And if that means you also get a chance to meet some folks from the other side of the border or from across the world, people really enjoy and embrace those experiences, because politics doesn't really always reflect what the average person is thinking or feeling about what's going on in their neighboring country.
Now, Tim, for folks who have never visited the Peace Gardens before, can you explain how it exists? So it straddles the border of Manitoba and North Dakota. Do you have to cross any border to access the Peace Gardens, or how does that work?
Yeah, so that's where it gets pretty interesting, in that when folks enter the Peace Garden, you're just going through our gate and maybe paying admission depending on this time of the year. It's when you leave after your visit that you have to report to either Canadian or U.S. Customs. So say someone's visiting from Manitoba for the day, they're not actually crossing into the U.S. They're just having to re-enter through the port of entry that CBSA mans. So that's always been a challenge as one of the more uniquely located gardens or parks in the world. Folks don't have to usually go through that sort of setup.
Right.
So we went through quite a bit during the pandemic, in that the different countries had different re-entry requirements. We're not anticipating anything that drastic this summer, but we as an organization always keep up with our partners at CBSA and US Customs in case there's anything they would like us to encourage visitors to do. Obviously bring passports and the required documentation, but yeah, that's always kind of a little bit of a hurdle that we try to help people get through. Not everyone is accustomed to going through port of entries as regularly as me and my staff are. So it can be a little confusing, but the garden came together obviously almost 100 years ago, prior to 9/11 and prior to significant world events that made crossing a little more difficult. Um, but by and large, people have a pretty good experience, not just visiting the garden, but going through and being greeted by very friendly custom agents.
What sort of benefit do you think a place like the Peace Garden has on visitors from both the United States and Canada, especially right now when it feels like tensions are a bit high? What sort of role can the Peace Garden serve in your mind right now?
I think it can always serve that great example of when you have interpersonal communication and you get together face to face. It's a lot easier to be friendly. We live in a very polarized world. A lot of people discuss a lot of things behind screens, which is not really indicative of the way we act when we interact with each other in person. So, one email I received after sending out the letter to our members was from a woman on the state side who said 4 years ago she had an incredible volunteer experience planting flowers for us one June, and spent the whole day next to a Canadian, and didn't know as much as she thought she did about Canada, but spending that day volunteering with people from both countries was eye-opening and really warmed her heart in knowing that, hey, we have some really great things in common, and it's awesome that we can meet at a place like this that celebrates that great relationship of Canadians and Americans.
Are there any worries regarding donations or visiting visitor numbers during this time? I know that things slow down. It's a bit of a slow season in the winter, but do any of those worries come up for you right now?
Not too bad, but that's why we wanted to get ahead of some of the discussion as soon as people started reaching out. We got through the pandemic, which was incredibly difficult and really hurt revenue for a couple years. So we don't foresee anything like that, but we're also aware that the dollars are quite different right now. And part of what we included in that letter was a mention that we're going to try to keep rates the same as 2024 numbers, and even work in a couple days in August where Canadians will get half off admission, another day where Americans will get half off admission, just to acknowledge, costs are rising, and we want to be a place where people are comfortable visiting, both in their interactions, but also stuff that works within their finances. So that'll be really exciting to see this year. It's the first time we've done anything like that in a while. And the only point in keeping those on separate days is more the logistics and being able to get people through. Because everything we try to do is with a Canadian and American component. And sometimes that's easier than not, just because of the logistics and the differences in the economies.
Lastly here, Tim, I appreciate you have a very unique perspective on this conversation with the work that you do. And you're as you mentioned, you're witnessing people from both sides of the border coming together, having these conversations. What advice would you give to Canadians right now who are watching the news, who are thinking about our neighbors down south? What advice do you have when we're engaging in conversations like this and we're thinking about our neighbors?
I think first and foremost, just that we're all humans. We all run through a variety of emotions, sometimes tied to our political identities as Americans or Canadians. But I've just had an incredible experience over the last 6+ years as an American who actually grew up outside of Washington, D.C., but has lived in the upper prairies for quite a while now. Just the warmth that's always been extended to me and my family from folks in our nearest town of Boissevain or Brandon, Winnipeg, across Manitoba. It's just always been incredible. And I hope that any Canadian listener or viewer right now would realize that the majority of Americans, we want to see you at the garden. We want to go up to Canada and shop and be good trade partners. So despite what leaders might be saying at certain times, by and large, as an American, I love all my Canadian friends and visitors to the garden, and hope that despite some of the talk that's been going on recently, we'll get through it like good neighbors always do, and encourage folks to visit the garden to really help serve as an example of what it means to be strong neighbors. And we look forward to seeing them.
Well, Tim, thank you again for joining us on Radio Noon, and thanks for being a good neighbor.
Thanks, Chloe. Take care.
Tim Chapman is the CEO of the International Peace Garden.
New on CBC Gem this February. 3 inspiring films that celebrate Black history. Summer of Soul unearths never-before-seen footage of the Harlem Cultural Festival in 1969, featuring music's greatest artists. Invisible Beauty profiles fashion icon Beth Ann Hardison and her lasting impact. And Queen of Glory takes us on an intimate journey of the Ghanaian immigrant experience. Watch them all for free, starting February 1st on CBC Gem.
You're listening to Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1. I'm Chloe Friesen. Coming up after our 12:35 news, it is our calling conversation, and we're asking the question, do parents really have a favorite child? New research says yes. We want to know how you feel about that. Do you agree, disagree? Were you the favorite child? Maybe not. You can call us in our calling conversation coming up, or you can send us a text message already at 204-588-7355. Well, as we've been hearing in the news, this morning the province announced a new K-8 dual-track school to be built in Winnipeg's Prairie Point neighborhood. It will accommodate over 600 students and will include 74 infant and child care spaces. Since 2019, the Pembina Trail School Division has seen a 17% growth in students. The new school will be designed to accommodate future growth. Here's Education and Early Learning Minister Tracy Schmidt.
Today, our government is proud to announce that we will be building a brand new K-8 school for families in Prairie Point. It's clear that Waverley is a growing community with many young families, which is helping to drive the significant enrollment that we're seeing in Pembina Trail School Division, and that's putting pressure on class sizes. Our government knows the importance of that critical one-on-one time between children and their educators. And so this new school is one way that we are taking action to help reduce class sizes and give kids the space that they need to grow and learn. And for the second year in a row, we are investing $3 million to specifically target reducing class sizes to support school divisions like Pembina Trails. Our government knows just how important it is to invest in children and their education. And that's why in just our first year in office, we have implemented a historic universal school nutrition program so that no kid has to learn on an empty stomach. We have hired over 630 new educators in our system so that you can get more one-on-one time with your teachers and your EAs. And we've also, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I know that your teachers and your parents really like it. We have banned cell phones in the classroom so that you can have the freedom and the time to learn and focus on school. And it's very important, and we know that it's important for your futures. And we've provided school divisions. We announced this just on Monday with another year of predictable and stable school funding. And we've done that for the second year in a row. That $67 million investment will help build off last year's funding increase. And that funding includes, again, our $30 million historic universal school nutrition program. So the new school that we're announcing here today will also provide 74 much-needed new childcare spaces to support the families in this community. We know how important childcare is for families. I know that as a mom. And we are going to be making those investments to grow the number of spaces both in childcare and in our K-12 system in this community. So we expect that construction of the new school is going to start in early 2026. The goal is to have the new school open in September of 2027. I know that this will be a welcome announcement for families and educators in this community. I'm hoping folks are feeling as overjoyed as I am about this new announcement. This is a great day for Waverley. It's a great day for kids in this community.
That was Education and Early Learning Minister Tracy Schmidt. As you heard there, the new school in Winnipeg's Prairie Point neighborhood has a targeted opening date of September 2027.
to California, where the people all live so fast. My baby said I was crazy, my mama called me lazy. I was gonna show them all this time, 'cause you know I ain't no fooling, I don't need no more schooling. I was born just to walk the line. Living on Tulsa time, living on Tulsa time. Well, you know I've been through it when I set my watch back to it. Living on Tulsa time.
That's Julian Taylor and Jim Cuddy with their cover of Tulsa Time, made famous by Don Williams in the late 70s. You're listening to Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1. I'm Chloe Friesen. Now stay tuned for our call-in conversation. I'm personally very curious about this one. As a sibling, do parents really have a favorite child? New research says yes. Call us in our call-in conversation and share your thoughts just after your CBC local news.
This is CBC News. We're at 12 o'clock. We're at 12:30. At 12:30, we're at minus 22 with an extreme cold warning in downtown Winnipeg. Good afternoon. I'm Matt Humphrey. Premier Wab Kinew says Manitoba has a long-term commitment to ensuring the Canadian-American relationship prospers for decades to come. And now is the time to build lasting partnerships.
The offensive that we're making here is a charm offensive. It's a friendship building, a relationship building exercise. And of course, as Canadians, we're always going to be able to stand up for ourselves. We always put our Canadian values first. But in this moment, it's crucial for us to use this window that we have with no tariffs to try and keep things that way.
That's Wab Kinew speaking earlier this morning in Washington, D.C. He's there with all of Canada's premiers kicking off a joint lobbying effort to convince the Trump administration to back away from its ongoing tariff threats. And the Canada-U.S. tariff tussle followed the Prime Minister to the NATO summit in Brussels. Justin Trudeau says Canada will respond with strength if Trump imposes steel and aluminum tariffs. He points out when they were used during Trump's first term, the United States lost 75,000 jobs. Trudeau maintains Canada does not want a trade war.
We think that the best thing for all of us in North America is to continue to work together, to focus on some of the international trade challenges, whether it be non-market economies or rising authoritarian economies. This is our focus. If we have to put that on pause while we stand up for Canadian jobs, while we stand up unequivocally for Canadian sovereignty, we'll do that.
Trudeau was also asked whether he's changed his tone around Trump's 51st state threats to Canada. Trudeau initially called that a joke, but told a business forum last week Trump is serious. Trudeau denies flip-flopping on it. And Manitoba's education minister hopes schools and school divisions will try to keep their travel local. During an unrelated news conference, Minister Tracy Schmidt was asked about whether she's discouraging school trips south of the border in light of the trade tensions with the United States. Schmidt says field trips and trips are important for children and their education, but she hopes divisions will consider supporting local attractions and businesses instead. And a new report exposes loopholes in Manitoba's rent control system, which embolden landlords to jack up rents. 14 tenants in West Broadway were interviewed. Most faced massive rent increases beyond the guidelines after landlords did renovations. Increases of up to 18% were approved through the Residential Tenancies Act. Stephen Hodges is with the West Broadway Tenants Committee. He says it's difficult to fight rent increases because the process can take 18 months.
It feels like the systems are stacked against us, that they don't listen to us, and that they aren't there to protect us. And it takes a lot of work to go through these challenges.
Hodges says tenants also worry if they appeal, they'll be targeted by their landlord. And that's your CBC News from Winnipeg.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Sorry if I sounded distracted at the beginning there. I was thrown by your...
Were you thinking about siblings?
I was thinking about siblings.
Do you have any siblings, Matt?
I do. I have an older and smarter brother.
Okay. Would you consider yourself the favorite?
I bet you it changes throughout the children's lives.
Okay, I'm going to pose this to our guest, Dr. Joanne Unger.
Yeah.
And we're gonna talk about that. I need to write that down, actually. Okay, does it change over time?
As the children are in different phases.
Great question.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that, and hopefully we can get some answers for you.
Back soon.
Thanks, Matt. That is CBC's Matt Humphrey. I'm Chloe Friesen. You're listening to Radio Noon, and that call-in conversation about being the favorite child, and a new study that says, yeah, parents actually do have a favorite child. We're going to talk more about that just shortly here. But first, CBC weather specialist Riley Lachuk joins us. Riley, earlier in the show, we were talking about the silver lining in all of this cold with Scott Kaler, the chief scientist at WeatherLogics. And it's that we might have less snow, less storms, more sun.
More sun, yeah.
So there's some positives.
What I've been saying for the last few days is that, the trade-off is we get a little bit more sun.
It's good to remember that. To remember that, especially when it's this cold out.
Yeah. I don't think I'm anyone's favorite.
Not today, maybe. When it comes to the weather, because you are the bearer of these temperatures.
And as I've been saying, and I know I sound like a broken record when I say this is going to last for at least another week or so. Some of the 10-day models have the cold starting to break a bit at the end of the 10-day models here, but again, that's far out from now. So we'll have to see what happens. But temperatures right now, -23 in Winnipeg, Gimli, -26 in Victoria Beach right now, and -28 still in Brandon. Yes, it's 12:30 in the afternoon, and we're still seeing temperatures close to or even below -30 right now, -32 in Churchill. With that extreme cold warning in place for southern and central Manitoba, looking at wind chills in particular tonight, actually, in some cases, particularly in Westman, close to or colder than -45 into the early morning hours. This is frostbite on exposed skin in minutes outside.
Goodness.
So
Okay.
we're looking at a very cold night, a very, very cold morning ahead tomorrow morning in particular. So keep that in mind into the morning hours tomorrow. Mostly sunny skies. There's a little bit of cloud hanging around. So I'm calling it a partly cloudy sky today just because, I mean, here in Winnipeg, it's been mainly sunny. But looking at satellite imagery, there is a little bit of cloud hanging around there. So mix of sun and clouds across the province this afternoon. What you see is what you get into Thursday. There was an area of low pressure moving in from Saskatchewan that was trying to compete with some of this high pressure. High pressure looks like it will win, so we'll keep a mix of sun and clouds into Thursday, a little bit more cloud cover into Friday, but other than that, pretty calm weather conditions aside from the cold for the next few days here. -20 this afternoon is what we're shooting for here in Winnipeg. I am optimistic we'll get there. Maybe a little bit too optimistic, but I think we can get to -20 this afternoon. Brandon -24, -22 in Dauphin, Thompson -23, -19 tomorrow in Winnipeg, -19s right through Saturday, Sunday -20, Monday -21. Low temperatures no warmer than -26 for the next 7 days.
Well, Riley, because of that optimism, I think you're my favorite CBC weather specialist.
I'm really trying to be optimistic.
You are my favorite CBC weather specialist.
Thank
you,
you.
Riley.
You're
We do
welcome.
appreciate you so much, even though it's cold out. It's
Yeah,
not
I
your
know.
fault. It's
Okay.
not your fault.
I try.
Thanks, Riley.
You're welcome.
That is, as I mentioned, your CBC weather specialist, Riley Lachuk. You're listening to Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1. I'm Chloe Friesen. Now, be honest. Were you the favorite child? Or did you stand by and watch as your sibling was favored? Ask any parent, and they likely, hopefully, say they don't have a favorite. But a new study suggests the answer is much more complicated. CBC's Blair Sanderson took to the streets to ask folks for their reaction.
Hello. Hello. How many brothers and sisters do you have? I have 4. Oldest sister, then a brother, and then a sister, and then me, and then my younger sister.
I have 2 sisters, older and younger.
I have 1 sibling.
I have 8.
4, 6.
2. Did your parents have a favorite?
My mother definitely had a favorite, and that was the baby. Might be partly because he was so unexpected. She thought she was in menopause, and then all of a sudden...
And that made him actually a favorite?
Yes.
Yeah. My middle sister. That's uncommon, but the middle child in my family is probably the favorite.
Now, why are you so sure that you're not the favorite?
Because I've been told many times that I'm not the favorite.
Get out of here.
Yeah, and I can, it's kind of one of those things too. I'm older, and you can see it in the parents' faces when their kids come up to you. The girls are still young. They don't tell me it directly, but like I said, I pick it up.
I just know. pretty obvious.
In what way?
Just like growing up my whole life, I feel like it's been pretty evident, just a feeling.
I think both my parents, they like to spend time with one kid in particular, but they love them all. I think it's similarity. I think one kid in my family is very similar to one parent, and another kid's very similar to the other parent. And so it's really easy for them to just hang out and have fun.
And your parents, though, never admit this?
They always say, no, there's no favorite. But I don't believe it.
Now, the study we're referencing was published by the American Psychological Association, and it's making headlines around the world. It says that parents sometimes do favor one child over another. It points to underlying factors like birth order, gender, temperament, and personality. Now, this may not feel like news if you have siblings and a long-standing hunch that there's a golden child in the family. But we want to know, we want to hear from you. Were you the favorite child, or did your sibling take top spot? How do you feel? Maybe as a parent, you can call in and you can make sure your kids know that you love them both equally. You can call us at 204-780-0893, 204-780-0893, or text us at 204-588-7355, 204-588-7355. Joining us now is clinical psychologist Dr. Joanne Unger. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You were giving some fantastic reactions to some of what we just heard right there. What stands out to you the most about what folks had to say about this study and where they feel they fit in terms of the favoritism?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Some people made some really very interesting comments of things that I was going to talk about too. So that was really fun. But favoritism is complicated. So it's definitely how it's perceived by children, and parents can be different. Also, what favoritism even means. So some people like the warmth that maybe comes from certain parents. Some people appreciate the time spent together. Some people appreciate autonomy and freedom. So how you define whether you are favored or not may be different from a parent perspective than from a child perspective. Also your age. So someone made a comment about, does that change over time? And certainly, as kids grow older, that relationship changes, obviously, right? So there's going to be differences. And it's really a lot about that perception of how you're treated by your parent and how you interpret that treatment.
You are a clinical psychologist. So from that perspective, I have to know, what's your reaction to the fact that this study was done in the first place? What do you think they were looking to prove or discover?
Absolutely. So it's very interesting because some of the research that they were talking about talks about how that preferential treatment is linked to mental health in the future. And that speaks to very much this idea that parents play a vital role in their children's development. And one of the things that, or a couple of things that are really important, there's many things, but some of them are a child's view of themselves and the view of the world. So if they get the sense from their parents that they're worthy of love and attention and favoritism, that tells them something about themselves that they take forward into the future. It tells them that they are worthy of love, that they're worthy of this time and attention given to them by this very important person in their life very early on. So it's really quite important in that sense of, we are laying some foundational ground for children and their development and their mental health. And also this particular study was looking at the effect that what children bring to that relationship and what they, in terms of their temperament, in terms of their gender, birth order, and personality, things that, parents don't have control over. How do those influence how parents then treat them on these different measures of favoritism? So recognizing that, this is an interaction, right? So that parent-child relationship is an interaction that between what the child brings just by being born and who they are in heredity, and then what the parent brings to that relationship.
Right. There's so many factors all at play here. Now, I got your clinical psychologist perspective, but now I want to hear from sibling Joanne.
So we had a very interesting WhatsApp chat on my family chat last night.
Did you ask this question?
Oh, so no, we just joked around, mostly around. Isn't it ironic that I am doing and in the middle like, yes, that must have been so hard for you. And then I mentioned that, one of the pieces was that the youngest child, so we had, that some banter around it, let's say.
Okay. So
And I think that's why it's so appealing, is because it's something that siblings talk about, right? And I hear this almost universally in every family, including my own, around who is the favorite. And so it speaks to a little bit like there's only so many resources parents have, right? They're only, one or two people that they have to care for, more than one child. And so there's this discussion around who gets that time and attention and what type, and is it a match for what I think of as being the type of attention I would like.
Right. Now, I want to get deeper into the findings here, but first I just want to reach out and let people know that they can call us. They can let us know if they're having this conversation with maybe their siblings, maybe they have a WhatsApp chat and you're joking about it, or maybe it's something that you think about a little bit more seriously. You can let us know. Call us at 204-780-0893 or text us at 204-588-7355. Does any of this resonate with you? Do you think that parents do have a favorite child? Now, Dr. Unger, we're looking at the findings here. This is a study that looked at close to 20,000 people in 30 different studies published in the US, Canada, and Western Europe between 2015 and 2022. Now, it found that younger siblings received more favorable treatment from their parents, but this was no longer true when the authors were looking at control and autonomy, so being having more responsibility, making your own choices. Then, after the youngest child, the parents preferred the eldest. So, in other words, parents were less controlling of older siblings. What are your thoughts on those findings?
Well, it's really developmentally appropriate, right? So as children get older, they have the ability to have more freedom. However, younger siblings, you often get that comment. And this was one of the pieces the study said that they wished and didn't have capacity studies, that sense of fairness. So you have these younger siblings that are going, hey, how come my older sibling gets to do this and I don't? And they have this sense of unfairness that they perceive as favoritism. However, they're not old enough yet to have that type of freedom. It's pretty natural that older children will get to do things before their younger siblings will. But younger siblings may not have that understanding. So for me as a clinical psychologist that works with families, the important messages of that is communicate to your younger children clearly about what's happening. So for example, I have two children, they're 4 years apart. And when my youngest would complain because they wanted to do everything their older sibling did, I would say, so when you are 4 years older, you will get to do that too. So there was this sense of, communicating the developmental differences to the younger child rather than just assuming that they will know that that's why, because it's obvious to us as parents why that we're doing this differential treatment, but to the child it may not make sense. And so if you're able to and that's what I mean when I'm talking about the perception of favoritism from a child's mind, what they are perceiving. And so having that really good communication from parents to kind of talk about why you're treating your children differently in terms of, and that comes across to more seriously with kids with different abilities, right? And different strengths and weaknesses. And because of, either safety concerns or ability levels, we really do need to tailor our parenting to their needs. But kids may not understand that that's what we're doing. And so having, very kind of positive, affirming everyone's strengths and that everyone has strengths and challenges, doing our best to communicate that in a really positive way, a non-shaming way with our kids.
It can feel, I guess, really serious for a kid if they do have a sense of favoritism.
Absolutely. And you know what? I think it does happen, right? Parents' best intention, we get that communicated to us, right? In our North American dominant culture, don't have a favorite, right? Treat all your kids and accept them all equally. But I think it can happen, right? And some of the pieces that your initial interviewees were pointing at was around similarities, right? So if we can understand our kid better, some of the things from the study, if they have an a personality that is a little bit smoother to parent, right? Those things are naturally a little bit easier to engage with that child. And then it can even get to the point more severe, where certain children will experience very harsh parenting and other children will not, and that can be very damaging.
No, you mentioned this just a bit here. The authors say, quote, some children may be easier to parent than others. What do you think of that finding? Is that something that you see to be true when you're working with families? Are parents at the place where they express that to you?
Well, yes, absolutely. So in terms of personality and temperament, it's real, right? Mm-hmm. So kids that are, more agreeable, more conscientious, they're more easily guided. It doesn't mean that they are worthy or less worthy of our attention, right? If they don't have those traits, but it can be, things can just be a little bit smoother on the parenting front, right? There's less maybe conflict. And so what I do with coaching with parents is talk a little bit about sometimes those characteristics that make them not as easy to parent are really good personality traits and will serve them well in the future. And so having that frame of mind of like, persistence, we call obstinance, right? And not wanting to follow our lead means like, maybe they'll be a leader someday, or, they won't just let people tell them what to do. They'll have some self-confidence. And so certainly, kids are different. And so every person in a family actually lives in a different family is something I also like to say, because of our perception, our position, the way we treat our parents and the way the parents treat us back. We each have even though we grew up in the same family, we have a very unique experience.
Very interesting. I'm still trying to figure out how to respond. One of my dad's favorite jokes is if he knows my sister and I are together, he will text us both individually saying, "How's my favorite kid?" And we both get the text message at the same time. Therefore, we are both the favorite. But I don't know. He finds it funny. I also kind of find it funny.
Yes. And so there's something I was going to talk about that too, but the humor behind it, right? Yeah. So we can poke and tease and make fun of it when we kind of know that we're well loved and it's okay, right? And we know that our parents are doing their best to show us equal treatment and care for us equally. But sometimes joking is the other side, where it's like this unhidden truth that I actually think might be the case. Right. And I don't know how to talk about this without, there's a kernel of truth in the joke, so to speak.
So, Dr. Unger, lastly, what can we do with this information now? We know that scientists are interested in learning more about this, but is this information useful to us, to listeners, to parents in any way? What should we be doing with this information now that we have it?
Yeah, I think, to remember that our children are in their formative years in terms of learning about their worth. And so it is important for us to make sure that each of our children feel their worthiness from us, even when they're different than each other. When kids speak up about fairness when they're little, or feel like, I'm unloved or I'm less valued than another, sometimes it's easy to brush that off. And sometimes kids do say it in a moment of anger and frustration, and in their heart they don't really believe it. But in that moment they might, right, feel like I am less worthy or I am unloved. And so to find ways to really communicate any differential treatment that we do provide, and to find ways that we connect with that child in a way that communicates to them very particularly and specifically that they are valued, even though that they are different, and that we spend time with each of our children in a way that it doesn't have to be the same for every child, but a way that they're going to receive that they recognize that my parent is making an effort and I'm worthy of their time and attention.
I really appreciate these insights, Dr. Unger. Thank you for joining us here on Radio Noon.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Joanne Unger is a clinical psychologist based in Winnipeg. You're listening to Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM, 990 AM, and everywhere on your CBC Listen app and on the YouTube live stream. Thanks for listening. Now, the Saskatoon Blind Hockey League is already in its third year and interest continues to grow. The players range from potential national team members to those learning to skate. For those with sight, it looks like hockey, as we know it, but it has a few quirks. A bigger puck, smaller nets, and a whole lot of fun. CBC's Dan Plaster went to check it out. He started by speaking with 18-year-old player Adam Kugler-Sprayson.
It is almost the same. However, there also are some adaptations. I'm Adam Kugler-Sprayson, and I play for the Saskatoon Blind Hockey Team, and I play forward. First of all, the net is smaller. It's about a foot shorter, I believe, and that's just for obvious reasons with the goalie, because they're 100% blind, and they can't hear the puck in the air very much. The second adaptation would be the puck, which is roughly around 3 times bigger than a regular puck. In game, you have to make one clean pass after you cross the blue line, and then you're able to score.
Really, when you watch the game, the only difference is they might overskate the puck, or if they go to make a pass, they might have to sweep twice because they missed the puck once. So I'm John Flatters. I'm a coach with the Saskatoon Blind Hockey Group here, and it's my first year actually, so learning just as much as these kids are probably out there. Really, the only difference is the goalie is fully blindfolded or I think at least partially blind or fully blind, or wears a blindfold, and the net's just a little bit smaller to make scoring a little harder for those snipers.
Roughly around 12 years ago, I discovered Courage Canada, which was originally what blind hockey started out to be. And then it kind of just disappeared and didn't hear much about it. And then a couple years ago, I discovered it again, and we developed a program in Saskatoon.
My name is Emma, and I play blind hockey. 2 years, and this is my 3rd year. Because you get to hit pucks that make noise, and I get my dad on my team for coaching. We play games and we practice our skating technique.
I want a challenge, and what's a better challenge than finding a new way to teach? It's kind of like teaching in a different language or teaching a different subject. It's the same sort of subject, but you have to think of new ways to teach it.
To make the Canadian national blind hockey team. They have training camps and tournaments. I'm considered as a prospect of the team, so sometimes they call me up and invite me to some of those tournaments, and it's very competitive, but it's very fun and very inclusive.
Adam Kugler-Sprayson and Emma Crossan both play in Saskatoon's Blind Hockey League. We also heard from John Flatters, who is a coach with the league. And thank you to CBC's Dan Plaster for bringing us that story. You're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1. A quick check-in on our weather forecast here. That extreme cold warning does remain in place for much of southern Manitoba. The wind chill is closer to minus 45 overnight. The 10-day models, and our CBC weather specialist Riley Lachuk made sure to write, don't make any bets on this, but the 10-day models show us inching closer to seasonal temperatures starting around February 22nd or so. As I mentioned, extreme cold warning in effect for here in Winnipeg, minus 22 right now at the Forks, feeling like minus 27 with the wind chill. As well, extreme cold warning in effect for the city of Brandon. Minus 28 sunny, feeling like minus 38 with the wind chill. In Thompson right now, minus 35. And in Churchill, minus 45 right now with the wind chill. Now, Radio Noon coming to an end shortly here, but coming up on Up to Speed, 3 Manitobans are making their debut at the 54th Annual Juno Awards. Boy Golden will join us to talk about becoming a first-time nominee. You definitely want to tune in for that conversation. Boy Golden, Liam Duncan, has had an incredible year of touring and music releases back in 2024. So stay tuned for that conversation on Up to Speed. Thank you to the whole team who helped put together today's show. Marshall Hodgins is our technician in Control Room 15. Sierra Sanders, our show director. Wendy Parker is our producer. And thank you to our YouTube live stream aficionado, Kevin Nipatebo. I'm Chloe Friesen. Thank you so much for listening to Radio Noon. Coming up next on CBC Radio 1, it's Bookends.